Hello, I'm Alan Siebenthaler, Marketing and Territory Manager at Hamilton Kent. Welcome to our latest webinar, Sealing the Deal, Best Practices in Gasket Selection and Quality Assurance. As one of North America's leading suppliers of gaskets for underground infrastructure, Hamilton Kent has over 65 years of first-hand experience supplying products to cities, municipalities, and other infrastructure owners. Hamilton Kent manufactures products for the underground infrastructure in two ISO 9001-2008 certified plants, one in Winchester, Tennessee, and the other in Toronto, Ontario, where our head office is located. Hamilton Kent produces a vast array of rubber gaskets and flexible pipe-to-structure connectors, but we are most widely known as the inventors of Tilox Super Seal Gasket, the world's first pre-lubricated gasket for precast pipe, manholes, and box culverts. You can see a TSS gasket on the spigot of the arch pipe pictured here. More recently, we introduced the world's first rubber manhole frame, the Lifespan system, a watertight frame and locking cover system that prevents rain-derived inflow from entering sanitary sewers through the top of the manhole. In this webinar, we will outline the process of gasket selection and current pipe gasket standards. While gasket selection may seem straightforward, there are many aspects to ensure the right gasket is selected for the application. The first major factor a plant must consider when selecting gaskets is the type of tooling being utilized. This will narrow the selection of gaskets immediately. Number two, if you are purchasing new tooling, you can formulate a plan for gaskets at the same time. You will have some control over how much you pay for gaskets based on the configuration of the joint. The tighter the joint, meaning the smaller the total annular space, the smaller the gaskets, and the lower the purchase price should be. But remember that the tighter the joint, the more exact you'll have to be during production. Number three, what are the contractors in your market expecting? O-ring, profile, or pre-lube gaskets? Checking with your customers would be a good idea and could dictate to some extent what gaskets you end up using. Some plants decide what gasket they want and don't give customers an option. This depends on your relationships and your ability to train customers on the use of a new gasket type. It's likely some education will be needed to get them started. The final consideration is what gasket characteristics are most important to you. If you say price first, that may limit your options. While price is always important, the overall value to you and to your customers is of greatest importance. We had a customer tell us that they wanted to switch to a pre-looped gasket because it was more contractor-proof. They figured that if the contractors were not going to equalize or lubricate the gasket anyway, the plant might as well send out a gasket that did not require these steps. They figured money would be saved by cutting down on the number of field service calls, even though the gaskets were more expensive. The next step in the process is to have your gasket supplier outline your options via the following process. First, the gasket company's engineering department will review the project or plant requirements and your plant's drawings for the total annular space, the diameter of the spigot, and other relevant dimensions depending on the gasket type. The engineers will then determine which gasket or gaskets they have available that will meet the requirements found during the evaluation. Finally, they will calculate the correct amount of stretch for the selected gaskets to determine the cut length of the gasket or gaskets. Obviously, they want to supply a gasket that will provide enough deformation and sealing force, but also ones that can be installed on the spigot with a reasonable amount of effort and will not be too loose and roll out of place when the joint is closed. Here's an example of a form containing gasket data you should expect to receive from your gasket supplier. The sheet should contain all of the critical measurements with regards to the selected gasket for each pipe size, including the part number, size, type, height, and more. This is all important information you should keep in your records, especially if you are responsible for a plant certified under the American Concrete Pipe Association's QCAS program or the National Precast Concrete Association's Plant Certification Program, as inspectors may ask to see it during their inspections. Now let's talk about material selection. We expect that in some cases, the gasket material your plant uses will be dictated by the specifications on a project. But in most cases, there is no material requirement, so you're getting the rubber material selected either by your plant or by your gasket supplier to meet everyday requirements. You may be required to utilize gaskets made of specialty rubber materials like polyisoprene for C1619 Class A or C361 projects. EPDM rubber has excellent ozone and UV resistance, So gaskets made of this material are used for applications where the gaskets are expected to be exposed to these elements for an extended period of time. For instance, box culvert or pipe where the gasket must be glued onto the spigot in advance of shipment to the job site. Other rubber materials might deteriorate enough in these situations to jeopardize their performance on the job site. EPDM is also a great material for applications where the joint could be exposed to acidic or high alkali conditions. Some projects require oil-resistant gaskets, which are usually made from neoprene or nitrile rubber. These types of projects include airports and parking structures or lots where there is potential for exposure to high levels of de-icing chemicals, oils, and fuels. In these cases, it is absolutely critical that your sales and estimation team pay close attention to the specs and even ask the project engineer to be certain. The price of these materials is significantly higher than typical rubber gaskets, and the delivery time will be substantially longer, so it will have a big impact on your bid price and on your schedule. One final note, there will be physical differences between gaskets made of different materials, especially neoprene and nitrile. Gaskets manufactured from these two materials will feel harder and more rigid and will be more challenging to install on the pipe. In this case, completely closing the joint will take more insertion force. Now let's take a moment to talk about ASTM requirements for gaskets. The industry requirements that were popular for so many years now refer to one specification for the physical properties of rubber gaskets, and that's ASTM C1619. So while you still see requirements for ASTM C361 and ASTM C443, your sales and engineering team will want to be familiar with the corresponding requirements in C1619. This is an outline of the different physical properties for each class, which I'll review on the next slide. Briefly, these are the descriptions for various classes of C1619 materials. Class A, this is your C361 gasket, which is used for low head pressure and will have premium physical properties, such as higher tensile strength. Class B, this requirement is for Class A or Class E applications, but with oil resistance. Class C, this is your everyday gasket for most common applications and corresponds with C443. Class D, these gaskets would be for Class C applications, but with oil resistance. And finally, Class E is for gravity flow sewers with 30 feet or less of hydrostatic head. Once you have specified your gasket, how do you know the gaskets you received in the field meet the project requirements? First, check to see that the gaskets are printed with the ASTM standards that they meet. Second, check to see if there is a colored stripe printed on the gasket. This is a common feature on specialty rubber materials to make them easily identifiable in the plant and in the field. In this photo, you can see the printing process with spec and product info printed in yellow on the top and the material identifying stripe printed on the front. If you are supplied by Hamilton Kent, we also provide customers with the results of physical tests performed in our QA lab as compared to ASTM physical requirements. All this can be supplied to the project engineers if required. For more information on gasket care, use, and quality assurance, please see Part 2 of this webinar, Sealing the Deal, Gasket Quality Assurance and Best Practices.